The group, the page, and YouTube. LinkedIn is yet to be approved.
Okay. So it goes to YouTube.
Yeah, I'll be editing from the studio, the title, etc. So I'll take care of that.
So I have gone on. Do I need to do anything else?
No, that's all.
And Facebook?
Facebook is also done via the custom live service.
Good evening, Avinash. How are you?
Yes,
Can you hear me well? Can we just do an audio check? We are live already.
yes, you're audible. Am I audible?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right. So we will start as we are already on time. Delighted to have you here today and welcome to our 17th webinar on understanding healthcare professionals and psychological well-being for them. This is our 17th webinar under the series Compassionate Caring, where we provide an expert's perspective on how can caregivers offer what is compassionate caring. Compassionate caring, in our view, is caring or caregiving that which takes into account not just the care receiver, but also the caregiver, that is compassionate to everybody in the system. Today's topic is mental health of healthcare professionals. And as we were having a conversation with Dr. Avinash D'Souza, who we are delighted to have with us today, we thought that mental health of healthcare professionals is such a wide topic, and it may be worthwhile for us to think about a small section today, and we can pick up different aspects as we go along in other webinars. But today, the conversation will be around um, understanding, teaching, and practicing resilience. And as we do that, I would like to first take some time and introduce to you all who are here today and who are with us in live session, Caregiver Sati. What is Caregiver Sati? Caregiver Sati is an endeavor, an organization, a social venture to create an ecosystem of well-being and healing for the primary caregivers. Family caregivers or informal caregivers or carers, as they are called in some places, um, are those people who are the family members of those navigating terminal illness, chronic, or any other life limiting condition, like disabilities, aging, mental health, or medical conditions like cancer or neurological conditions. These family members also carry caregiver burden and by extension, they have their unique challenges, and we would like to support the caregivers as they go through their caregiving journeys and beyond. We wish to create an environment of well-being by empowering the caregiver and helping the caregiver and the care receiver or the patient lead full lives. So, what does that mean, and how do we do this? We believe very deeply in human connection. Just today, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who had to come down from UK to look after his father in Kerala. And he said that for the last 1 month, he has touched nobody other than his dog. And he misses human connection. While technology has advanced, it appears that our touch phones get far more touch than another human being. And it impacts us, it impacts all of us. And we want to retain the human connection and human touch because that defines us in so many ways and differentiates us from other. So we would like to have tech-enabled systems, but continue the human touch and human connection. For this, we conduct awareness programs, both online and offline. We have a helpline because sometimes it is not possible to reach everywhere, and telecommunications can be very enabling. We have healing circles, which are support group meetings for family caregivers so that they can support and reach out to each other and share wisdom and be an anchor for each other. Social media communication, join us through all the platforms that are available, the dominant ones. We hope to be able to extend to other platforms as well. Provide relevant information at the time that you need it the most. So access to relevant information is a challenge. We curate information for family caregivers so that they can have access to the right amount of information. Otherwise, navigating the World Wide Web can be quite a nightmare. We are in the process of enabling a tech-enabled support system for other services that can be curated and used by caregivers. We have an app, and I would encourage all of you to download that app and give us feedback and use that app. The primary purpose of that app is to help family caregivers create the time and space so that they can invest in themselves and create healing for themselves. Only when the family caregiver is healed and has space for themselves can they create the environment of healing and well-being for their loved one who is also navigating a disease or a mental health or a healthcare condition that is additionally challenging. The resources that we have built so far include the tech-enabled support system, our website, app, our online and offline programs, including an assessment, our app, a community which is available on Facebook and WhatsApp. We have caregiver stories. We refer to caregiver stories as the stories of gentle warriors, and caregiver stories that we share through our videos. If you follow our YouTube channel, you will be able to access a large number of gentle warrior stories. We also have conversations with caregivers, and Compassionate Caring is the webinars and the series with experts that help us understand what might be a healthy, balanced, and compassionate way of providing long-term care, which can be lonely, difficult, or challenging at times. Caregiver coaching is the one-on-one coaching for caregivers so that they can manage themselves, have healthy lives, and have a sense of well-being, not just during their caregiving journey, but even beyond. Family counseling, because illness is not just that impacts one person, it typically impacts the entire family and the whole system. So sometimes everybody needs to understand their role and how to navigate, how to share the burden, and how to be able to be mindful of all that might come down the path for them. We have a volunteer-based respite care program, which we hope that we will be able to bring to full force once the anxiety around Corona and COVID recedes. In the meanwhile, the volunteer-based program is to support our organization. And if you are interested in volunteering with our organization, please reach out to us and we will be delighted to have you in our volunteer program. There are many ways in which you can get involved because fundamentally we are all caregivers or at least well-wishers of caregivers. So join the healing group, healing circles or support groups, share your caregiving stories or encourage other caregivers to share their caregiving stories. Help us spread the word both in person and on social media so that people are aware that there are at least resources and support systems that are available for family caregivers. I hear this all the time. This morning I was having a conversation with somebody and they said, oh, we didn't think there was something for a caregiver as well. So if you can help us amplify our voice, then it will be a big deal. Volunteer with us. There are so many things that we need to do on the social media platform to be able to reach out, to be able to create interesting content. We need volunteers all the time, and you could volunteer your time. And when you volunteer your time, your skills, your thoughts, then there is a sense of well-being that you generally create in the community. So I would encourage you to volunteer. We are a not-for-profit organization and we need donations and raising funds. Your contribution could be towards that if that's what appeals to you. We've had more than 40 interns over this program, and I was surprised and delightfully surprised that the youth, not just those who are interested in social work or are motivated that way, but youth from all streams, including engineering, including sciences, including commerce, business management, have been interested in understanding not just this issue, but the cause of our organization. So we are open to interns who might be willing to go through the rigor and the grind. And if you know interns who would like to apply, ask them to go through our rigorous selection process. We are looking for partners in terms of other organizations that might curate services for caregivers, hospitals that might be open to our healing circles and the programs that we have to offer to caregivers, and organizations that want to be caregiver-friendly workplaces. So if you know of your organization that might be interested in such a program, then get in touch with us and we will be happy to design a customized program for the hospital, the partner, or the organization. We have a framework under which we operate to create the well-being for the caregiver. This is a framework for well-being and resilience, and Dr. Avinash will talk to us about his perspective as well. For now, we look at well-being as 7 elements of well-being. At the core is the physiological, spiritual, and psychological well-being. This is inward looking for the individual. This is encompassed in an outward or an interface with the world, social well-being, financial and legal well-being, life and work purpose, all of which is ensconced in one's creative expression, which is the 7th element of well-being. And that can enable you to deal with grief and encourage your resilience to be able to spiral out and have a transformative journey through long-term care or any form of grief that you might be encountered with. We believe stress is caused by an imbalance in one's well-being. The 7 elements of it, there are many ways of looking at well-being. We are looking at it like this, the 7 elements. An imbalance in the well-being over a long period of time can cause stress, and unaddressed chronic stress can lead to mental health issues. Building resilience is a practice that needs to be addressed through practices of mind, body, and soul, and taking the concept of resilience further, especially for healthcare practitioners who are in emotionally and physically stressful environments, is the topic of conversation today. And with that, an introduction to an eminent and highly accomplished speaker today, Dr. Avinash D'Souza, who's a consultant psychiatrist and psychotherapist. There are very, very few people I know who are both. And so it is very impressive. The founder trustee of the D'Souza Foundation. a trust that works in the area of mental health awareness across all sectors. I remember the first meeting that I had with him, and we spoke about a variety of issues, and he zoned in on mental health challenges, social care practitioners, and said, Bhavna, this is an area we need to focus and work on. So delighted to be here in collaboration with you. He's an associate professor and secretary at the International Institute of Organizational Psychological Medicine, an organization that works in the field of organizational psychological medicine across 7 countries. He's an international faculty for UNESCO chair in bioethics, working in over 8 countries for the same. He's the chief editor at Indian Journal of Mental Health, associate editor at the Annals of Indian Psychiatry, Industrial Psychiatry Journal, the Global Ethics Inquiry, and assistant editor at Indian Journal of Psychiatry. I'll get tired reading your credentials, Dr. D'Souza. He works with 8 mainstream and special schools in Mumbai as a visiting school psychiatrist, counselor, and school mental health expert. He's a visiting faculty and professor at various teacher training courses across Mumbai and at multiple psychotherapy training programs across India. He has over 700 publications in national and international journals and is the author of 12 books in the area of mental health. That is such an incredible achievement. He is one of the few psychiatrists who, in addition to psychiatry degree, has a master's in counseling and psychotherapy, an MPhil in applied psychology, and an MBA in HR. He has been awarded a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Hertford, UK in the year 2011. I need a glass of water after that. So we will spend the next, some admin announcements for everyone. We will spend the next 60 odd minutes having a discussion around the topic of the day and its implications for compassionate caring. It's a question answer exchange between Dr. D'Souza and I. So we will have that exchange. We will also have a where we will encourage you to ask your questions by raising your hand or leaving them in the chat box, and we for a conversation. And of course, there will be feedback and suggestions. Please keep your microphone muted at all times to minimize background sounds. And when you are invited to share, you will be unmuted. If you are seated and your camera is stable, keep it on, else we request you to turn off your camera. We are recording this session, and we are also going live on the Caregiver Saathi Facebook page and YouTube channel. This is for your information. The discussion will be referred to for designing further similar programs. And that said, welcome, Dr. D'Souza.
Good evening. Well, thank you. Yeah.
I am so happy, you know, this is finally coming to fruition, a conversation that we had so long ago.
Yes, it did.
So now that we are here, I would like to start by asking you to share with us how you associate with Caregiver Saathi and the topic for today.
Well, I think one of the main issues that comes up is that as a mental health professional, when you deal with so many patients, and there's a whole lot of negative stuff that you hear on a day-to-day basis, it's very important that I think all mental health professionals need to have their own time and their own resilience, because you need to bounce back from that negativity to getting positive again to the very next patient that comes to you, and probably the next day at work, take positivity back home when you leave your clinic and go home. So that's a day-to-day thing. And of course, I think when we see patients who are suicidal, when we see patients who are at the brink of giving up life, despite all the help available, it does make you wonder at times whether we're doing our job correctly or not, and whether there's something that's going wrong. And that's the time when your own resilience can get broken. So it's very important that mental health professionals need to maintain themselves from this whole issue. And keeping that in mind, I think that's where the topic sort of resonates. And normally mental health professionals don't sort of take care of themselves, so it's very important that they should spend a lot of time taking care of themselves. So that's again where this topic resonates.
As a family caregiver, we believe that our final beneficiary is actually the family caregiver, the person who is usually invisible and usually sometimes even referred to as a bystander in the medical world, unfortunately. But the family caregiver tends to be somebody who's taken for granted, who is invisible in the system. And we believe that healthcare practitioners, doctors, can have a huge influence because families and family caregivers sometimes have blind faith on doctors. Can you share with us how you relate with this idea personally as Avinash, the person?
Well, I think the whole issue here is that as a person, there are times when we all feel low. We all have crises. We all have individual problems. And one of the key things is that we have to bounce back from those problems. So I think there have been many times in my life where I may have been down because of probably some financial issue, some personal issue, some family issue. And we have to find a way out despite that and come up. So that's where I think I resonate with the whole issue of resilience.
And have you ever been a caregiver yourself?
Well, not as yet, but I have seen a large number of caregivers, so I totally understand what they go through.
Hmm. So, in your experience and your understanding of the world in terms of healthcare practitioners, and the fact that you think that healthcare practitioners or doctors do not invest so much time on their own well being and their own resilience, what do you think are the reasons for that?
I think there's a large amount of work. There's less time given to the self. There's having to give time to the family. So there's a lack of me time. And I think what also happens is that they're so much into their work that they keep working without realizing that they're probably burning the candle at both ends.
Hmm.
And it's important that they have to remove time for themselves. And they very often think, I won't get affected, which I think is a misconception that many of them have.
Right. So, what would you say is your understanding from all the work that you have done in terms of writing and reading about resilience? How would you help our audience understand what is resilience? And let's start with that.
I'm just going to share, just enable sharing for me. I think they have disabled the sharing. I'll just,
You can.
just enable the sharing for me. So I'll just share my screen. Yeah, one. Okay, so to begin with, when we look at resilience, if you go by a definition, resilience is the ability to recover or adjust easily from misfortune or change. This is a Webster dictionary definition which is there, and this is something we all know. But according to me, there are 6 domains of resilience. The first is collaboration. You need to have a huge amount of social support. You need to have a huge amount of social help. You need to have a group that you can deal with. The second concept is vision. You need to have a purpose and where you see yourself a few years from now. That helps in building your resilience. Your personal health matters a lot. That is your nutrition, your sleep, your exercise. Your reasoning matters a lot. Your problem solving abilities, resourcefulness, etc. And your composure, to regulate emotions and multiple other things. And lastly is your tenacity. The persistence and ability to sort of bounce back from those situations is what matters. Now, a modern definition of resilience would be advancing. That is, you work towards a particular vision. Despite, that is, you remain proactive. You don't just wait for adversity to come in. And when adversity comes in, you're able to handle those challenges and move on. And that is what entails the concept of resilience. Now, when we look at resilience, there are many important factors that go there. One is your goals have to be realistic. You should, not set goals which are not realistic. There has to be a certain amount of self-esteem that is measured. You have to learn from mistakes. There also is important that you understand and accept your strengths and weaknesses. It's important. One has to be optimistic. There's also willingness to overcome certain difficulties, ability to recognize certain emotions, and to have the ability to seek assistance from others. We shouldn't think that we're able to do it on our own. So one of the key things in resilience is teamwork. So you need to realize that teamwork is also something which is very, very important. So I think these are the issues which are there. There is control of the self, there's social support, there's optimism, there's the ability to solve certain problems, there's emotional awareness, belief that you can do it. So self-belief is a very important factor. And I think a very important factor in taking care of yourselves as a mental health professionals is having a good sense of humor. You need to have a good sense of humor because you're dealing with a large number of serious situations. So we need to maintain a good sense of humor, which I think is vital. And a lot of factors can affect resilience. So there can be financial woes, there can be anxiety, there can be death in a family, there can be substance use, depression, divorce, loneliness. So a lot of things like this can affect resilience, but the key thing is to be able to bounce back from that. So people who recover from an addiction need resilience. People who recover from the death of a relative need resilience. People who are recovering from depression need it. People who are going through anxiety need it. People with financial woes need it. People who are undergoing a divorce need it. People who are lonely need it. So everyone needs resilience in some form or the other. And finally, I think what I would want to say is the only thing that helps you persevere is your resilience and commitment. I don't think anything else would matter more. So I think this is, a few of my thoughts with which I will sort of say what resilience is. Yeah. Yeah. I am not able to hear you, ma'am.
That was like a capsule, quick run through maybe, the hundreds of papers that you have read and your, understanding of the subject. Now, here's the thing that was coming up for me as you were describing what you think resilience is and what must one do. So, why is it that it is hard, or learning resilience is important and it is hard to learn to be resilient? Or can resilience be taught?
Well, I think resilience can be taught. It's not that it can't be taught. What's very important is you need to first have the mindset to learn about it. Then you need the right people to guide you. It's not only something that's taught in a classroom, it's also a personality trait. So I think that also matters. So you need to work together to develop resilience. And only when you do that, well, I think, it would sort of come through. And I think you should also understand there's a need for you to learn it. It's not something that, in fact, I've always said resilience building should be a part of curriculums in schools. And I think if that is done, we'll probably have a new generation, which is, better.
Yeah. So, because you work with school students and you work with perhaps people across age groups and, healthcare practitioners, especially doctors who might be faced with trauma, illness, difficulties, death, so much more than an average person. Knowing something cognitively and practicing it are two different things altogether. So, what do you think somebody who is listening to this conversation can look at for themselves, saying, now, I know for myself, for example, I understand what resilience is, but I may or may not be practicing what is required to be resilient on a daily basis. How would you break that down for a doctor?
I think the key thing is a doctor faces a lot of setbacks. So one has to understand some patients improve, some don't. Some difficult patients are there, some not so difficult patients are there. The key is not to blame yourself and your ability when that happens. And the key is to look at the fact that there is always new ways out, and there are new ways to deal with these situations. One can't get forlorn and lost and feel upset and feel that nothing's going to happen. So that, I think, is what probably is very important. And also, if you're not a bad doctor, it's just that sometimes some patients do have issues that don't respond. And more importantly, as a mental health professional, you don't let the negativity get to you. That's very important.
Yeah. So I think self-blame is a crucial criteria, and that can definitely impact doctors. In a world where we are saying that, saving lives is very important, the metric of a good doctor is how much you have recovered or how many lives you have saved. It can be a huge pressure, and it can be a strange metric to chase. Um, how do you think healthcare practitioners can take help and support from each other? One of the other things that one hears is perhaps doctors and healthcare practitioners might need to learn how to take help for themselves.
So I think we need to have our groups of people where we can go, we can talk, we can discuss, we can even emote if needed, have a catharsis, cry out a bit, no harm. But we need to have our own group of people with whom we can probably speak to, an internal group maybe that meets once in 15 days or once a month. I think that's something which is very important, and I think that is something which is lacking. So we need to have our own groups of people. So if we do have that, I think we're in a better framework. If we don't have that, then the loneliness sets in, that you're fighting all alone. So that's the first step, and the second step is recognizing that you're human and you're vulnerable.
So one of the things that came up in another conversation that I was having was, how does a person set up their emotional infrastructure? So what would you say could be some of the ways in which to set up a reliable emotional infrastructure for yourself? A lot of times people say that if you have good friends and you can drink, you can have some good drinking session, then that should be enough. Clearly, that's not a good way out, right? What you're talking about, your support group, is different from group of friends that just meet to laugh and drink. What about that?
So I think what's very important is that you need to have a group of people who, not only, it's not about drinking with them, it's about being able to relate to them, it's about being able to talk to them. You have to stay with positive people, people that don't make you negative, and people that overall help you in a sort of much better way. So
Yeah.
that is something which I feel is vital. And once you're able to do that, then I think you'll be in a sounder position to manage yourself. So it's not about eating and drinking, it's more about being able to converse and emote.
I like that distinction very much. I think having good, healthy conversations can be far more, energizing and replenishing than maybe just a meal or a drink. Um, there was a scary statistic about very high degrees of substance abuse, alcoholism among young medical students. And what is your recommendation for somebody who may have gone down that path about recovering and reintegrating with life?
Well, I think it's important that the young people, learn the value of freedom, and they learn, and they learn that, okay, if I do have the freedom and I have the ability to drink, smoke, do what I want, I shouldn't misuse it. So it has to be taught to them probably in medical school and colleges. So when we probably teach them that, they learn to be wise with their choices. And I think if we do have people who are into this kind of a thing, and we only have to teach them how it's going to break them emotionally rather than help them. And dependence on close people is far more important than dependence on a chemical.
Yeah. But there might be a case, and there might be somebody who now is dependent and who now is addicted. What can caregivers do in those circumstances?
Well, I think first thing is don't blame the person. It's a disorder. It's not something he's doing purposely. Find out the cause, the root cause. Why is that happening? Whether there's a need for attention, there's a need for love, there's a need for caring. It's a coping mechanism. You need to find that out. And it's also very important that you try and find out the reason that this drinking has become heavy. And once you know it's something, then the treatment part, so the medical treatment, the psychological treatment, the family treatment, all that matters. And I think caregivers have to realize it is a psychiatric problem. It's not that their child or their young adult has just gone astray, and it's something that needs help. And when they realize that, I think, that's when they'll be able to get help in a much better way. And the blame game has not to be there, that you don't blame someone for it and you don't blame any one person for it. The entire family is responsible and has to take charge and deal with the issue when it comes up.
So when you are a well-wisher of a caregiver, let's say I'm a friend of a doctor, but I'm not a doctor myself, right? Very often I have felt that even if I have expressed care and affection and concern for a doctor, the doctor may have felt that, I'm not qualified enough, right? I'm not a doctor or I'm not a psychotherapist. So they may not have taken my help and support and my life experience seriously, whereas I may have life experience to offer. What can family of healthcare practitioners and doctors or friends of doctors who are not really doctors themselves do to support their doctor friends?
I think the key is that you have to be frank and open and tell them that they are wrong if they are wrong. You have to be frank and open and tell them that they're not looking after themselves if they aren't. Explain to them why. Sit them down over a cup of tea or coffee and explain to them. If they don't listen and they don't agree, we leave them till they listen to themselves. But we explain to them the detrimental effects of this and how it will happen in the long run, which I think is very important. We also need to tell them that you're in a profession which is demanding. So these things are bound to happen and you need to take out that time for yourself. Failure to do that is only going to let yourself deteriorate further. So you need to come out there and get the help you need. You need to emote, speak, talk, do all that you need to, but do it now so that you don't sort of suffer later.
So I might need to acquire some language and some skills to be able to have that conversation, right? I remember I have a very dear friend who was really struggling with alcohol abuse. But for me to be able to sit that person down and have that conversation with that person meant that I had to learn how to have that conversation with them. So I might be very I might know that that person is not doing the right thing. I might be well intentioned, but I have to still learn how to conduct that conversation. So what can a well-wisher or a friend do to learn
I
how?
think I think we don't use words like disorders. We don't use words like depression, anxiety without thinking. We just talk about being stressed out and normalize the whole process rather than look at it as pathological. It's also important that we don't tell them they need help. We rather tell them they need rest and they need to recoup. That's more important. We tell them that you appear to be a little overworked and stressed out, rather than saying you're depressed, you're irritable, you're anxious. Don't Yeah, and don't be in a hurry to label, because generally I always say, be in mental health, we first name it, then after that we shame it. That's what invariably happens. So it's important that we don't label. It's important that we are open minded and talk to them in a general manner.
Right. No, that's very useful, because I do think that of late our language, our everyday language, seems to be using words like anxiety, depression, disorder, OCD, some very casually. You seem to have OCD, whereas that can potentially be a trigger. So what I would like to talk about now is that, what do you think in terms of resilience? So, for example, if I want to now learn what can I do to build resilience not only for myself, but the people around me? What can I do?
I think use positivity. That's the first thing. Talk about positive examples. Anything that happens has a positive side and a negative side. Focus on the positive. Give them as much social support as possible. Uh, Give them time to themselves also to learn and understand what's going on with them. Don't leave them alone. Make them realize that others are with you. Make them realize that there's a lot of community support within. So community resilience being high, individual resilience also builds. Family being supportive, family resilience being high, individual resilience also builds. So the key thing is that we build this by a lot of issues, and when we sort of do this, then automatically I think a lot of things come into place. The most important factor is not letting the individual slide alone.
Yeah. So, is it possible in your wide experience for you to take a real life example? Because one of the questions that we had was take a case and a real life example and how you have worked with that person.
Well, I will give you the example of a plastic surgeon who was a very well known plastic surgeon. And he lost both his hands in a car accident.
Oh my God.
So the thing is, he was sent to me for counseling, and the key concern was, now what do I tell this man when he doesn't have hands and he's not going to be able to operate and he's not going to be able to speak? And no plastic surgery is going to rectify him, though he's a very well known plastic surgeon himself. So I told him one of the things which you can do is probably not give up on surgery. I agree you can't operate, but you can definitely sit and direct. You can definitely sit and tell people what to do and how to do and what is what. So you may not be able to show them, but you can definitely teach them and direct them. So even in his own hospital, in the operation theater, he would have a chair, similar to that of those tennis referees, sit at a higher level, see how the operation is going on. So he didn't lose touch with surgery post that. And he joined a medical college, became a postgraduate teacher where he used to teach surgery and anatomy, so that he didn't lose his touch with medication, with medicine. And he would be able to take clinical decisions for difficult cases, though he probably may not operate on them. And very often his clinical acumen being good, he was an asset to that college. So that's how we brought him into mainstream work again.
So if I look at it in our framework of well-being, I see that you tapped into that person's life work purpose, his passion of wanting to be in surgery, but now also accepting the fact that life is different and I can't do it myself. How can I repurpose my how can I repurpose my expression, my creative expression, find a new avenue, and then go ahead. I really like some of the examples. But can you, in this particular case, tell us a little more of, so this is a suggestion that you gave him, but give us a feel of the challenges that the doctor faced when he came to you, he or she, whoever.
See, I think when he came, he was very distraught because he knew it was the end of the road for him from a career perspective. Okay, so he felt, how will I earn? What will I do? Today he's a professor. There's a salary he gets. He gets paid for his clinical diagnosis and acumen. He's the author of a famous textbook on plastic surgery. So he's dictated and people have typed. So so he's diverted himself that way. So I think the key thing is the framework is that you keep doing what you're doing. Even if, say, you're not probably there. So I always remember, so there's this whole saying by Martin Luther King, if you can't run, walk, if you can't walk, crawl. But the key thing is you got to keep moving forward. So that's something which I feel is very, very important. And I always remember something which I remember seeing in one of the movies was that life isn't all sunshine and roses. It's a very mean place, and people will keep you to your knees if you let them keep you. The key thing is you're going to get hit. So it's not that you won't get hit, but you got to keep moving forward despite getting hit. So it's not about getting hit. You will get hit, but you got to keep moving forward. So that's very important.
I just got gooseflesh when you said that thing about, it speaks to so beautifully that, just find the way to move forward. And
Yes.
persist. So sometimes, for example, I can think of myself, even in the journey of building caregiver Sati, right? Now I could have a conversation with you. I feel I feel out of steam. I feel it's a difficult path that we are charting, and I get tired. And I wonder if I have enough perseverance and resilience because, it feels like it's a difficult area. So there are so many days when I feel we are going back more than we are going forward. But I will remember this, that it's okay to inch and it's okay to, crawl maybe for a few days, but so long as you're moving.
Yes, that's what's important. You got to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Maybe sometimes lateral also. Maybe sometimes you
Yeah.
will.
Sometimes you need to just sit down and take a breather where you are so that you can then sprint the next day.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
There was, in fact, recently a very beautiful article in HBR about how resilience is not so much about endurance as much as it is about replenishment. So, to your point, that take a breather, relax, and think about running the next day. I quite like that point. One of the questions that came to us from the participants before they joined the session was, can you give us some live examples? But here's one more question, which is, how do you give support and care to patients with mental illness specific strategies?
I think it depends on the level of the mental illness. Very severe mental illness, the least you can do is love them and respect their human rights. Very moderate to mild mental illness, where they have insight, treat them like you would treat any other human being. Let them make mistakes, let them learn, be good to them. Don't just name them, shame them, blame them. I would say it's very important that you look at them like it's a very simple thing in your language. I would never want anyone to say my father is schizophrenic. I would rather say my father suffers from schizophrenia. So very simple change in language is something that would change your attitude. So I would never have a young boy who would tell me, he'd come and tell me, doctor, I've come to you because my dad is alcoholic. So I say, no, your dad isn't alcoholic, he suffers from alcohol dependence. So I mean, a very simple change in your terminology would go a very long way in helping. So I think we need to work at just at that level, the whole perception. So I have my husband who's depressive for 10 years. No, I am my husband who's been suffering from depression for 10 years. I think that itself changes the whole concept. Yeah.
It's a simple thing, but it is so powerful and so important,
Yeah.
and so much that anyone can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also like your example of, sitting down your friend with a cup of tea and saying, let's have a chat. And I think what you're doing is not okay.
Right.
Yes. Can you talk to what is resilience for healthcare workers that are looking at strengthening their mental health?
Well, I think one of the things about healthcare workers is that, they're day in and day out of hospitals, they're day in and day out of death, life. So I think they need to be, positive from time to time. They need to show teamwork. They need to also understand that their work is strenuous. So they need to space out their work. They need to take offs when they want. They need to take day off, spend time with the family, do some things beyond medicine, which I think is very vital. And if they do that, I think then they are on the right path.
Right, right. I'm going to ask the audience to think about their questions and put them in the chat box, and so that we can ask them the questions. But I do want to talk to you, Dr. Avinash, about a key concept, and that key concept is around compassion fatigue. So we know that compassion fatigue can deeply impact helpers or people in professions like doctors, medicine, social work, healers. So can you tell us, how do we make sense of compassion fatigue, and what can doctors and healthcare practitioners do?
Well, I think compassion fatigue is when your sense of giving, caring, etc. dwindles over time.
Yeah.
It's one of the components, lateral components of burnout, and it does happen. So I think we have to realize that we are people who primarily need to keep being compassionate. We're in the mental health profession, so we can't we're treating human beings, we're not treating people. And I always say that there's no other branch of medicine like psychiatry where the person brings to you the most compassionate aspects of his life. And the thing is, he'll tell you his deepest, darkest secrets, things that even his family member doesn't know. And I believe psychiatry is one field of medicine where you combine scientific knowledge and human understanding together. And so there you can't lose that compassion bit. It's very, very important. And I think when you keep that in mind, I think you have to work towards it.
Yeah. I think for doctors and healthcare practitioners and social workers to remember that they will not have unending reservoir of compassion and that they can get tired. Like I noticed this myself. Usually, there's often said this that Mumbai is a very resilient city. A lot happens here, but people get back to work, right? At some level, I also feel that because so much happens, people have become numb over a period of time. And that's a risk that healthcare practitioners can also have. So, but if you are numb, then you cannot be empathetic and you cannot be compassionate and you cannot be such a good healer or a doctor. So, how can a doctor maintain a healthy balance of coping as well as, not running out of their compassion fuel?
Well, I think the key thing is to take offs. The key thing is to, switch off from work when possible. Spend time doing things you would do, because you're not a doctor 24 hours. You're a father, mother, brother, husband, wife, everything. So you need to sort of recover from that.
So we have a question here, and I might ask Pooja if she wants to ask herself. Pooja, would you like to ask your question yourself?
Am I audible enough?
Yes, you are.
Good evening, sir. So my
Hi.
question was, we talked about changing the
I
terminology.
read your question about experiencing. Yes. Now my whole thing is that, see, I don't think mental illnesses are sometimes always positive experiences. So I think I wouldn't want to use the word experience. I mean, you can't say I'm experiencing a divorce. You can say, yes, I experience loneliness. That's fine. But I think experiencing depression would be a nice way of saying it. But then depression is also negative. So I would, the reason why I use the word suffering is because I don't want people to lose notion of the fact that it is a disorder, and they are suffering from a disorder and it's not their fault. So the word suffering medicalizes it, which is very important.
I really like the nuance. I hope that addresses your question, Pooja.
Thank you, sir. It answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that, we seem to be living in a world where suffering or grief or these things seem like bad words. For example, I found in another setting somebody saying that, I find it hard to say I'm grieving. Whereas grieving is a very natural and normal phenomenon. So, how would you respond to something like,
Well, I think if you have trouble grieving, then very often, you're the type who probably has been through it for the first time. So you really don't know what emotions you're undergoing. Or B, you have some unconscious emotions towards the person that doesn't allow you to grieve. So I think, both need to be then explored.
Oh, so beautifully said. I really like that. I think sometimes if I look back when I had difficulty about grieving, I think I was under too much pressure
Yes.
to be strong and bold and not be seen as somebody who got emotional. So, as if, there was, grieving is not a good thing because it's wasting time and it is not something you should do. But I like your perspective that there might be something holding you back. Thank you for that. Are there any questions? I'm going to look at the chat box for any other questions that people might have. You could also raise your hand and we could then ask you to ask your question. What I would like for our audience to know is to watch our space, both on Caregiver Sati as well as, programs that we have to offer. We are very soon announcing a program for healthcare practitioners on building resilience and practicing resilience. And if you're interested to know more about it, drop us a line at info@caregiversathi.co.in, and we will be happy to take you through that. What I'd like to do is also have a set of poll questions for the audience. So for people who are on our call, on the Zoom call, they will be able to participate in the poll that we will be launching soon. So may I request my colleague to launch the poll so that people can respond to those questions. And those of you who are following us on our Facebook as well as YouTube live stream, may I request you to leave us a comment, feedback, or any suggestions about how we can conduct such programs for similar topics or other topics that you might want us to cover. The theme, the core theme being that we are addressing the needs and challenges of family caregivers, and we are looking at it from the perspective of how can we bring in compassionate caring that doesn't undermine the family caregiver. So what might you need as a family caregiver yourself today, or if you see yourself being a caregiver in the future, what do you think might be some of the topics that need addressing? And if you leave us a message, we will be happy to curate a program or a session that can help address those questions. I hope that the rest of you who are on the Zoom call are able to look at the poll questions and are able to respond to them. Dr. Avinash, can you see the responses?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I think your point around resilience being taught in school is a great point because one, it is very valuable, but two, unfortunately, life skills like resilience are not taught in schools and colleges, even in fairly intense professions. I have often heard people say things like, children are very resilient themselves. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, I think all children are, born with a certain amount of resilience, because resilience is also a genetic trait. And I think you build on that as you go along.
Yeah. What do you think are the factors that can deplete one's resilience?
Loneliness, lack of family support, lack of finances, a constricted worldview, and bad relationships.
And more about constricted worldview.
Well, then when you're not open-minded, you get less resilient, because then you feel everything revolves around a few factors which are not under your control. But when you get open-minded, life becomes a lot easier.
Give me an example, please.
I had a young girl who was being bullied, and so she was being called a lesbian by her classmates. So she was very disturbed about it.
Right.
So she came to me and she spoke to me about it. And the key thing is that when she did speak to me, she said, I feel affected because they're calling me a lesbian. And I said, what's wrong about it? It's a very normal thing, and 3% of the world is lesbian. So I said, why are you thinking about it negatively? I said, that's because you live in a society which is probably heterosexist and homophobic, and that's why you think that way. The moment you think there's nothing wrong in being lesbian, doesn't mean you have to become one, but there's nothing wrong about being it. You'll be able to manage life better. And then the bullying affected her much less. So, sometimes it's just that, your constricted worldview is what affects you at times.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great example. Sometimes, just while because you're an expert, you were able to list out the response so quickly, saying these are the factors. For somebody listening to understand, an example makes it a lot.
Yeah.
Can you tell me another big reason that comes in the way?
Well, I think it's your own lack of self-belief.
I have grown up to doubt myself, and I don't.
No, you feel it won't happen. See, whenever you want to take a step which is going to make you resilient, in India, very often we say "log kya kahenge," and then that puts you back. So I think the key thing is that we have to realize we have to take certain steps for ourselves without bothering what the world may feel.
So if I have low self-belief and I have low confidence, I don't take this step. What are two things I can do?
One is probably consult a professional and seek what's the right method for you. And then trust the professional and take that step rather than trying to, live in your own self-doubt.
That's so fantastic. I really like your way of, you have such precise and pointed responses. I'm going to look at the chat box and ask people if they have any question to ask and if they have any thoughts or feedback. But while people do that, Dr. Avinash, what would you like to say as a matter of this topic and bringing this to a close today?
Well, I think the key thing is that resilience is something that can be taught. It is something that can be learned, but it's something that we have to cultivate. That's what I would say. And it's something that is an attitude that we have to bring in.
Yes. I am very keen that you say something to our venture and about what we are attempting to do at Caregiver Saathi. So would you like to say something to that as well?
Well, I think like we discussed, we want to try and build up a course which can look at resilience building, which is open to all. And I think it'll be something which will be worth its while. So I would tell everyone that if you did like our program today and you did like what I spoke and you want to learn more from me, then please join the course. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, we would like to offer that program and we would like to offer resilience. We have a question, one more from Pooja, which says that can resilience be taught to kids as young as in 6th standard?
It can be taught to kids as young as KG, leave alone 6th standard, I think. So, it can be taught at any age. So simply teaching a KG child that, when you fall down in the playground, don't depend on your mom and dad to come and pick you up. You got to get up on your own. And, even if you limp to your mom and dad, it's fine, but you limp. So I think that's the key thing.
Yeah. I think sometimes parents and family members, etc., and well-wishers of caregivers sometimes, or patients, become overprotective and they take away the resilience of others by being these protective people. What do you think about that? Do you think that hypothesis is correct, that people are overprotective?
They are. And I think that does affect the role.
Yeah. So I think keeping in mind that when we are a true caregiver and we are a true well-wisher and we wish the resilience of the person that we care for, then we have to allow for them to be independent as well, is as important as doing things for them.
Right.
Well, I don't think there are too many questions, and we are very grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Introduction to the topic and the relevance, especially for healthcare practitioners.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. We look forward to more sessions with you.
Sure, we do. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great evening and a wonderful weekend. Let us know if you have any feedback, suggestions, or inputs to give.